Welcome to Lamp Talk. I'm Michael Kelly, and today we have an absolute legend of the craft, Jim Plannette. If you've ever marveled at the lighting in films like Young Frankenstein, E.T., Braveheart, or Traffic, you've seen Jim's work in action. But this conversation isn't just about the films, it's about the journey. From growing up with a gaffer father to becoming one of the most respected minds in the lighting industry, Jim's career is a masterclass in storytelling through light. In this first part, we go back to the very beginning, his childhood, his first steps in the industry, and the lessons that shaped him. Let's dive in. Jim, a pleasure to have you here on the Lamp Talk. It's obviously an honor to have not just you, but your knowledge base about this industry and the people and the time and just the vast amount of work, amazing work that you've done. We're really, really, really pleased that you spent some time with us on this rainy, weird morning. Sort of wanted to start from the beginning. And for those of you who don't know you, you came from a gaffer's world. Your father was a gaffer on some amazing, amazing films. One of my favorites, Shanghai Express. I'm a huge Marlene Dietrich fan and a Joseph von Sternberg. So, that film alone was an amazing one. But High Noon and, just the list goes on and on. At what point in your life as a young man did you sort of understand what your dad did for a living? Because it's a strange moment when you realize that, when your dad goes to work every day, that he's doing something that most fathers aren't doing.
Well, I visited my father on sets many times, and so I knew what he was doing. When I was 10 or 12 years old, I was visiting a set at a studio, and I looked around at all the lights on the green bed, and it just looked so confusing. I said, "How do you know where to put all the lights?" And he said, "Well, first you have to learn to look at light, and then when you have to recreate it, you have an image in your head." The best advice I've ever had about lighting
It's so simple.
is make it look real. And it really, at the end, should be invisible. It shouldn't call attention to itself. It should just help tell the story. And so that was really good. When I was 14, my father invited my mother and sister and me to visit him in Rome while he was working on Land of the Pharaohs. Unbelievable. And but I used to go and visit the set in Rome. And one day I was there, and the prop master came up to me, and he said, "Hey, Jimmy, you want to be my assistant?" I said, "Well, sure." He said, "Here, take this iced tea to Howard Hawks." So I'm making it across the stage with this iced tea in my hand, and my father sees me. He said, "Jimmy, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm the assistant prop man." He said, "What's that?" I said, "It's iced tea for Howard Hawks." He said, "You'll go far." But really being on a set like that, and I visited him on many sets, it really was made me really interested in the movie business. And so when I was about 18 or 19, I told my dad, I said, I may get in the movie business. He said, "You don't want to do that." I said, "Why not?" He said, "There's no security," which of course is true.
It is.
And I said, "Well, you've done pretty well." He said, "Yeah, but not everybody does." And so I was going to college. I was going to be a lawyer.
Wow.
And I dropped out for a semester to earn some extra money. And the easiest way was in the movie business. That was 60 years ago.
Right.
So, and I've never regretted the change, because one of my oldest friends is a lawyer, and I think my life has been much more interesting than his.
Likely, yeah. The amount of traveling alone.
No, I've traveled so many places. It's wonderful. So it really, as I said, it's still fun, so I enjoy it.
So did you start working as an electrician for your dad, or were you working for other people?
No, I started, as a permit working in different places. It took me a while to get into the union. You have to work 30 days for one employer or 90 days for multiple employers. And somehow when I was there 29 days, I got laid off.
Weird.
In the 60s, the unions weren't so anxious to get new members because they wanted work for the members they had. And there was a group system. So eventually I got in as a group 3. And so that meant all the group 1s and 2s had to be working before you could work.
Right.
So I was actually doing 2 jobs. I had a newspaper delivery job early in the morning, and then I would go to work wherever I went. And but I eventually got in the union in 1967, and I started. I was at Universal when I became a Group 1, and so I started working on shows, and then I became a best boy, and it didn't seem I would ever be a gaffer because they kept giving another guy a chance, and he'd only last a week, and then he'd get replaced. And so I left Universal because I thought that would be a smart idea. And a gaffer that I'd worked with as a best boy, George Dahlquist, called me and he said, "You did the right thing."
Wow.
And so I was a best boy on a movie called Koch with Richard Klein, who my father had worked with when Richard was 17 on CoverGirl with Rita Hayworth. Then the next movie I did, I was the gaffer for him for 2 weeks in Los Angeles. They'd been shooting in Mexico. But he was a kind of DP that would hire a young gaffer so he could tell him what to do.
I've seen a few of those.
And I didn't want to do that. So when he offered me another job, I said, no, thank you.
What year was that?
1972.
Okay.
So the way I like to work is while the cameraman is setting up the shot, I like to do the lighting.
Yeah.
And then when he's finished setting up the shot, if he sees any change he wants to make, it's simple. But we don't start lighting at that time. So things move faster that way.
Sure.
So and a lot of cameramen are collaborators and like to do it that way. So that works out fine.
Yeah. It's an interesting blend of personalities in that regard, that some cameramen want to tell you exactly what lamp to put where, and others are just sort of let you paint and do your business, which is the role I prefer because, I love lighting. So
Sure.
Yeah. So 72, you started gaffing. And then in 1974, something pretty important happened.
Well, just a little before that, I started working with John Alonzo, who was an amazing cinematographer. And we did a TV pilot. And we shot around town. And then we moved to 20th Century Fox on stage. And we had this set that had been used before, so it was lights were all up there. So I went into this interior and I saw all these lights, and I just had no idea how to use them. So, but I noticed there was a muslin ceiling that they had rolled up, so they would roll it out if they would ever see the ceiling. So I rolled it out. I turned all the lights on through the muslin ceiling. It was unbleached, so I put half blue on them. And that gave ambient light inside, and then I brought the lights in from outside. And so he came in and he looked around. He said, "Looks good, we're ready." And that's not the first time I used a muslin ceiling. But so then we went to Paramount to do a movie called Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York with Jeannie Berlin. And Jeannie Berlin rewrote the script and brought it to Robert Evans. And when Robert Evans told the director, Sid Fury, about that, Sid Fury, pardon the pun, became furious and said, "No actor's going to rewrite my script. I'm out of here." So we were shooting a test at Paramount, and the phone rang, and they said, "This movie has been postponed indefinitely. You're all out of work." So John Alonzo had a pay or play, so he was being paid. And so they fired the cameraman on Chinatown, and that's how John Alonzo got Chinatown. So Jeannie Berlin is responsible for John Alonzo doing that movie.
Quite a gift.
That's right. And the Key Grip got us a little movie to do with a cameraman I'd never worked with before from New York named Jerry Hirschfeld. And that worked out pretty well. So Jerry Hirschfeld offered me Young Frankenstein. So Jeannie Berlin is responsible for me doing Young Frankenstein, which I worked with her a couple of years ago, and I told her that, So luck plays an important part in everybody's career, and I was really lucky. In 1974 to get something like Young Frankenstein, it's a miracle. But and it was great fun to do, and that it was so strange. The cast and crew would laugh in the middle of takes all the time. Sometimes the camera operator would be laughing so hard you could see the magazine wiggling.
Right.
but it was quite a challenge and fun.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful film, but I mean, obviously a masterpiece, but visually the film is stunning. It holds up to any black and white film made prior or since. I mean, it really is a gorgeous, gorgeous film. And that's a hard task, if you've never shot on black and white, to really learn that routine and learn what color does. And
so originally that movie was going to be a Columbia movie. And Mel Brooks was having a meeting at Columbia. And he said, of course we have to be black and white. And they said, yes, sure, but we'll shoot in color. We'll make it black and white. He said, you're liars, and release it in color. I'm out of here. And he left Columbia because of that and went to 20th Century Fox. And Alan Ladd Jr., who was running Fox at the time, said, of course it's black and white. So I've done 3 or 4 black and white movies, but that's the only one on actual black and white film.
wow.
The reason I've used color to make it black and white is the ASA is so much faster.
Sure.
I did The Artist, which was a silent movie in black and white, but the ASA of color film was 500, and it was 200 for black and white. So it's more than a stop difference.
Yeah. So how much prep on a film like that in 1974 were you getting? How much work were you doing prior to shooting?
I don't remember, actually. It's a while ago. But I would think 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay. Same as ever. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Initially, that film was oddly received. People had mixed reactions to it. It was a huge hit, but visually, people were a little. I was a very young man when that film came out, but when I saw it, I was a little confused by it. I didn't know what to expect. It was sort of obviously it was a Mel Brooks film, so I knew that we had some comedy coming. But I had no concept of the complexity visually or story-wise that film was going to portray. And it really threw me for a loop, which I applaud to this day, because Mel Brooks never tips his hat in that film. And it doesn't do it visually either. There's no giveaways. You really have to pay attention to the details. And I could go on with that film for weeks. So that film does well. Your career is now blossoming. Where do you go from there? What's the next hurdle?
Well, I did a bunch of low-budget movies with some new cameramen who wanted, an experienced gaffer, which was good. And then I started working. I worked with John Alonzo some more. I did a movie called The Legend of the Lone Ranger with Laszlo Kovacs. And then I did Cannery Row with Sven Nykvist.
Wow.
It's my second movie with him. And that was an amazing challenge. They actually invited me to come and look at the set before we were going to start prepping, actually, to ask me whether we would use carbon arcs or not, because that would determine how high they could have the sky backing. Because you could put a 10K up on a rail, but you couldn't put an arc up there. Right. And so it was all of stage 30 at MGM. And when I walked in and saw the size of this place, I said, we're going to use arcs. And they said, okay. And, I was looking around. And they said, oh, by the way, we're going to leave the stage door open. I'm sorry, what? That's going to be a big job to block that in. Do we have to do that? I said, yes. You better tell the grip department. Right. So I did. So we looked out this stage door probably 200 or 300 feet, and it was all blacked in by the grips.
They had to black it in 200 feet out past the door?
That's right.
Wow.
The production designer was Richard McDonald, and he had the sets touching the sky backing. So, I'm sorry, how do you light? So I mentioned to Conrad Hall, an old friend of mine, that I was working with Richard McDonald because I knew he had. And Conrad said, oh, yeah, he designs a set and then defies you to photograph it.
Yeah.
Which is really true. And what it made it important to me to realize that the production designer has to collaborate with the DP because he has to design a set that you can light and photograph.
Sure.
And Richard McDonald didn't care anything about that. He just designed the set. So we only prepped about 2 or 3 weeks on that movie. And we were shooting tests every morning and every afternoon. And then the lab was on the lot, actually.
Right.
So Sven and I would go and see the test in the morning. And after the second day, we were walking back to the stage, and he said, it's going to work. I said, well, yes, of course. He said, I'll tell you the truth. When I saw the size of that set, if I hadn't had a contract, I would have gone back to Stockholm.
Wow.
He said, I'm used to photographing two faces in a teacup. And I actually watched Cannery Row again not too long ago, and it's really an amazing-looking movie. A challenge, needless to say, but a lot of fun.
But those are the ones, the challenges are the ones that you
No, of course.
end up, sort of not necessarily being the most proud of, because you all have investment in every picture you do, but those really challenging moments are the ones that you recall and the ones that you really draw on. Those are the ones that I remember of all the whenever I do a film and there's something that's impossible to do and you do it.
Right.
Then you're like, okay, well,
Of course, my father saw a lot of changes. My father started as a gaffer in 1919 and worked till 1969. But I've seen a lot of changes too, because
boy, have you ever.
Most people don't use arcs anymore, except maybe Paul Thomas Anderson.
Right.
But it's the idea is still the same. Help tell the story without calling attention to yourself.
Right.
But that's true about costumes and music and production design.
Yeah.
You help tell the story, that's all. You don't say, hey, look at me. No.
I think Sven was credited with one of my favorite quotes. And somebody asked him, well, where's the light coming from? And he said the same place the music does.
Good point.
Yeah. If it's telling the story,
right,
then don't worry about where the light source
right.
is. It's if it's pushing the story or telling the story, then who cares? Like there's some things that we just have to let go. If the window, is not the light source, but there's a window.
Right. So, and then right after Cannery Row, one afternoon we were working, and this guy came to see me, and he said, I'm doing a movie, and I wonder if you'd be interested in doing it. It's called A Boy's Life. It was Alan Davio asking me to work with him on A Boy's Life, which turned out to be E.T.
Right.
And so we called it A Boy's Life because Stephen didn't want anyone to know what the movie was about. And we had badges to get on the stage, and it was, very secret. Don't talk about it, But that was, of course, a lot of fun and a challenge as well.
No.
And Alan Davio was such a pleasure to work with. And
I've never worked with him. I've only met him.
Right. We kind of played good cop, bad cop. If it was something that Stephen wanted to hear, Alan would tell him. If it was something Stephen didn't want to hear, I would tell him.
Oh, that's good.
Which maybe is why I only worked once with Steven Spielberg. But
maybe, yeah. I think that a film like E.T., and it's been re-released, and the beauty of that film comes a lot from the story itself. But again, it's a gorgeous film. It's the photography stands up. All these films that you've done that you go back and look at again and again and again, the photography works. And obviously you've worked with a myriad of different DPs. But there's a lot to be said about films that don't stand out in an entire career. There's not one film that I know that you've done that I go, it doesn't happen. There's none.
So happy.
Yeah. You may feel differently. There's always films that I want a piece back of or a shot that I would redo if I could. There's always those moments, but I can't think of a film of that you've been part of that I go, oh man.
Thank you.
And the story may not be the best, always, but visually they're always.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the goal, of course, No, I've been, as I said, really lucky, and I've done a lot of films that still stand up. And actually, Young Frankenstein I've seen on the big screen more than any other movie I've done.
I've probably seen that film on the big screen more than any movie I've ever seen, period.
And recently, really not too long ago, we went to the Egyptian and saw it on a Friday. And then the next day, Saturday, we went to the Writers Guild Theater on Doheny and saw Remembering Gene Wilder, which is a wonderful documentary that you laugh a lot, but be sure to bring Kleenex because you cry a lot. But it tells the story of Gene Wilder, who was the originator of the script of Young Frankenstein. And I think he really is responsible for the majority of the script, because he would write and then Mel would make a few comments. But while we were getting ready to shoot on Young Frankenstein, Gene Wilder got a few of us together and he said, "You guys got to help me. I don't want this to become Blazing Frankenstein." And he succeeded.
Yeah.
Because it's a separate movie by itself. And of course, Marty Feldman is just an amazing person, and he was great fun to work with.
Amazing casting. I mean, flawless, perfect casting.
Right.
Of course, Leachman alone, is worth the price of admission. And for me, that film, especially since Gene made sure that those details were attended to, and with Mel, I believe it was Gene who said that Mel couldn't be in the movie. Is that true?
He admitted it's very specific.
Right. That's an amazing push for a young actor.
Absolutely.
To make that sort of stand,
right.
Especially with someone like Mel Brooks, who's
That's right.
a force to be reckoned with.
Anyway, I stayed friends with Alan Davio for many, many years. And so he eventually ended up at the Motion Picture Home. Right. And Henry Thomas and I worked together again and stayed friends. And Henry Thomas sent me a commercial that he'd done that was based on E.T. about the time Alan Davio died. And I took it to the Motion Picture Home to show it to Alan. And I made him smile, which was the whole idea.
Right.
And Alan Davio is an amazing guy who had a wonderful career. I mean, E.T. was his first feature, so not his last.
No. But also did a lot for the industry after he retired. I mean, he was so involved in the industry, trying to train young people and bring people up. Really a lovely human being.
Right.
Yeah. What year did that film come out?
It came out in 82. We shot it in 81.
So by 1982, you're still using ARCs?
No. We're HMIs.
Okay.
A movie I did just after E.T. was The Night Shift with Ron Howard, director. Oh my gosh, it was really something. Henry Winkler and
Michael Keaton.
Yeah. For some reason, and I actually can't remember why now, I started doing commercials after that, right. And not doing movies. And I was working with a director named Melvin Sokolsky, who was a wonderful guy. And but then in 1985, I was watching the Today Show in the morning, and there was a director there talking about a movie he'd done. And I said, I should get back into movies. And so I called Stephen Poster, and I said, I want to get back into movies. He said, I'm coming up with a movie. He said, you want to work with me? I said, oh, sure. He said, come to the house. We'll talk about it. So I went over there, and we talked. And I said, are there many nights? And he said, no, not many. I said, that's too bad. I like nights. Oh, he said, actually, there's a lot. But night is good because you have complete control then, that was called The Boy Who Could Fly. But anyway, I did quite a few movies with Stephen Poster, and I got back into doing movies. And it's interesting that commercials then were non-union.
Right.
And I don't know why I wanted to do them, but I did.
I think there's a nice, 3-day weeks and 4-day weeks, that make commercials very, you're not traveling as much. So if you want to be home more, commercials are very attractive in that regard.
Right.
For me, the pattern has always been nice that you do a feature and then you come home and you do some commercials for a bit and then the next feature starts.
No, absolutely.
And, So that pattern for me has always been really lovely. It's a little bit harder right now, but.
Right.
So when do you meet Steven Soderbergh?
Well, I was working on a movie, and I got a call. The second unit, Key Grip, said, I'm doing a movie with Steven Soderbergh. He's going to be his own DP. And I knew who Steven Soderbergh was, right. But I said, good. And then, like 2 days later, I got a call to go in for an interview with him for this movie, Traffic. And I didn't know how he ever I guess a producer actually recommended me to him.
Okay.
So we were talking, and the assistant director, Greg Jacobs, was there, and the production manager, Fred Brost. And at one point, Stephen said, Jim, he said, do you have a style? Something I never ever thought of, you know? But for some reason, it popped into my head. I knew this guy who taught a class at the Sherwood Oaks Experimental College at how to make low-budget movies, and his class was called Cinema Minima. And so I said, yes, Cinema Minima. He said, you're my guy. And so we did Traffic. And the idea with Traffic was to make it look like a documentary, not a movie, so that lighting really had to be invisible. And it worked.
Right.
It was really a wonderful movie to work on. We traveled all around the country and to Mexico, and so I really enjoyed it. And then he had told me while we were shooting that his next movie was going to be Ocean's 11, and he was going to have a DP on that one. And then shortly after we finished, I was working on Heist with Robert Elswit, and Stephen called and he said, I'm going to be my own DP on Ocean's 11 because I don't think it would be fair to the DP. And so would you like to do it? And I said, oh, yes, it's one of my favorite movies. Right. He said, have you seen it lately? I hadn't seen it in 40 years, you know. So I took a look at it. It's not a very, it's a wonderful movie because of the Rat Pack, but otherwise it's not very good. So anyway, we did Ocean's 11, and then we've done quite a few movies after that.
Yeah, pretty nice long career.
But while I was working with him, I think on Kimmy, I read some book that was about all of his interviews and different things. One of his interviews, he said, we didn't use any lights on Traffic. So I went into work the next day, and I said, Stephen, I read this. I said, I had a truck full of tungsten and a truck full of daylight HMIs. I said, we used a lot of lights. Oh, I guess we did. But it's good that you could say that because you didn't notice it.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea. Yeah.
Amazing.
So, although there's the opening scene where we introduced Michael Douglas to the movie was in a huge courtroom in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it had a wall of windows that faced north. So nothing changed.
Right.
We didn't use any lights in that set.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And it looks wonderful.
Yeah. You know, it's obviously very stylized. You know, a lot of use of color as a storytelling portion.
Well, he was trying to make sure the audience knew we were in a different story. So we used different film and different filters and in each story. So and in Mexico, we used a number 2 tobacco filter and a 45-degree angle shutter.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, but it's, you know, it's a really bold choice in that film because he uses it very well, and that story is very would be very hard to tell without some delineation between those pieces,
right?
Because the overlap of the stories is would be complicated to tell without it. It's, you know, it's a rough choice. So how much on set were you doing with those color palettes? Were you really, had he decided what color palettes he wanted before you guys started?
He did.
Okay.
Yeah. And like the stuff with Michael Douglas, we used, we made that kind of cold blue and I shot a grayscale with a quarter CTO on the lighting the grayscale, so they had to add blue to make it gray.
Right.
And although, as I said, the Mexico was number 2 tobacco and a 45-degree shutter, which kind of slows down the film quite a bit. And we were shooting some exterior in New Mexico, and we got there in the afternoon, we shot, and we're going to do the next morning just until noon, and then we're going to go to El Paso. But we got up the next morning, and there was bright sunlight, and then the afternoon before it had been all overcast. So he said, let's reshoot everything we did yesterday. And so we got to El Paso pretty late, and we had a day interior to do, but it was at night. And so I put lights out the windows, and I put grid cloth on the windows so they blow out. And it was a kind of difficult lighting. And so I told him to put a number 1 tobacco filter on and a 90-degree shutter. so I could have some exposure. We're still shooting at a 2.5.
Right.
And so when he came in and saw all these lights, he said, I said, we have to do it this way. And so it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that film worked out pretty good. So for a lot of viewers that are watching this, they've never shot film. That's an anomaly for a lot of people now. So understanding why you'd use a 45-degree shutter creatively, is a little bit new for some folks.
Sure.
Obviously filtration is something that people use less and less on camera because they can do a lot of stuff in post. But a 45-degree shutter bakes that in. Can you sort of explain why that creative choice was important for those sets in Mexico?
As I said, Stephen wanted to make every story a little bit different so that you didn't have to put typo there saying, we're in Mexico now or something. So that I thought was a really good idea. Another thing which kind of still surprises me is we were in the van going somewhere, and he said, in Mexico, everybody should speak Spanish. And in the script, they all spoke English.
Right.
And I said, of course, which added a tremendous amount to the story.
Yeah.
So he's a wonderful director and very creative, but sometimes it's on the spur of the moment that comes up. And the 45-degree shutter, the movement of people is much different than with a 200-degree shutter.
Right.
And so it just made it a little more distinctive.
Okay.
And then, as I said, after that, we did Ocean's 11. And so he said, I'm going to shoot some tests in Las Vegas. Do you want to come with me? And I said, oh, sure. He said, I'm going to use that film we used on Traffic, the 800 ASA film, which I really didn't like.
Right.
And so I said, well, I understand, but let's take some 500 ASA color film and test that as well. And so that's what we used on Ocean's 11. And in the casino in Bellagio, there's all these recessed lights in the ceiling that were on a dimmer at 60%.
Oh.
So I said, let's bring them up to 100%.
Right.
And so we were able to shoot in the casino by just lighting a little bit in the background and lighting the foreground. And so we shot one day there in the casino, and they let us shoot from from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Wow.
And normally in the casinos in Las Vegas, you could shoot from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So that was very nice because Jerry Weintraub knew the owner of the casino. And so, of course, they asked us to do French hours,
Right.
that 8 hours. So I went to the production manager, Fred Brost, and I said, I understand why we need to shoot French hours. I said, but we'll work 8 hours without a break, but you ought to pay us for 10 hours. And he said, that seems fair. Something for you, something for us.
Right.
Which is the way it ought to be. And
Sure.
That's the kind of production manager Fred Brost was. When we'd go scouting locations, he wouldn't look for the cheapest motel for us. He'd look for the nicest motel for us. I mean, really a wonderful guy who considered that the crew was important.
Odd idea. Seems like a novel approach.
Right.
Did you end up pushing the film at all? Did you
We pushed. I think we only pushed one stop.
Okay, that's not too bad. Was 800? Was the 800 ASA film just too grainy? Was the grain structure too loud?
It's contrasty, and I didn't really like the look of it.
Okay.
It was distinctive for Traffic, but
Sure.
we didn't need that for all of Ocean's 11.
Yeah. I remember my wife and I sitting down for a film test, and we just shot newspapers with about 6 different film stocks. And we're sitting there talking about grain structure and color and blah, 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 all the things that are really important. And she said, I can't tell the difference between any of them. They all look the same to me. And I said, okay, good. Like, that's the important thing, that if you don't notice the difference and we do, then that's the important part.
Right.
That the storyteller understands what that means, but as a viewer, without the technical, knowledge, then it's just a story. So I think that's really great.
To kind of go back a few years, I got a call from a production manager, and he said he was doing a movie in Chicago, and the DP wanted me to be the gaffer. But he said, this isn't your kind of movie. I said, I'm sorry, what do you mean? He said, it's not big budget. We can't afford Musco lights. So I said, I can do low budget movies.
Right.
So we talked, and okay, he hired me. The Stephen Poster was the DP. And so we're going to shoot in Chicago, and we were scouting near Lake Michigan. And in the script, it says, "The curtains open, revealing Lake Michigan." And so they did that. And I thought, we really should have hard gels on those windows to balance to the exterior, but that's expensive. And Ray Hartwick, the production manager, tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Jim, hard gels are in the budget." I said, "Okay." Then we went outside to talk about a night shot. And the director said, "Well, the car drives up to the front of the house, they stay there for a little, and then they drive away." So I'm thinking, let's see, night, we're going to need a condor down there and a condor there, 2 extra men, an extra generator. Low budget. Ray tapped me on the shoulder and he said, 2 condors, 2 extra men, an extra generator, they're in the budget. So what that taught me was the most important thing is that the production manager understands how to make a movie. Right. So when he's putting together the budget, he knows what's going to be needed, and he puts those in the budget.
Sure.
Because the problem comes when you ask for something that's not in the budget. Well, that's not in the budget. Well, it should be.
Right.
And I did 3 or 4 movies with Ray Hartwick, and he never let me down. It was just really wonderful.
Well, that's part of their training as well, to really understand, what a film needs and should be. Yeah. But what I like about our craft and a lot of crafts below the line is that there really are journeyman processes. You really work your way up from carrying cable to gaffing. And that teaches a lot of things, but part of it is to respect the entire process and to respect what other crafts do, to really learn to work with a DP and a key grip and, having a good relationship with a focus puller. Those things are really critical. And I think if you walk in blind, A, you don't know what you're doing, but B, you don't understand the subtleties of a set.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So that's what I really like about at least our side of it, is that almost anybody who's on set has come through the ringer to get where they are.
I did one movie with a DP who became a DP right out of film school. And it was a nightmare because he really didn't understand how things worked.
Right.
And I never worked with him again. And I'm sure that was his choice as well as mine. But it really is important to understand how to make a movie.
Yeah.
And you don't learn that in film school. You learn it on the set.
As with any craft, anything that you're doing, you can't go to school to be a woodworker and expect to come out to be a craftsman. It takes time and it takes effort and failure and all those great things that make
learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. That was just the beginning of Jim Plannette's incredible story. From his early days working with his father to carving out his own path in Hollywood, we've seen how a lifelong dedication to light and storytelling can shape an entire career. But we're just getting started. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe for more stories behind the lights.